Welcome to Alaska Weather. My name is Eric Holloway and I work for the National Weather Service here February 19th, 2020. We have a couple options if you would like to research your weather a little bit further after this program. A 1-800 number will get you through a menu system to dial into your area of concern. Or we have weather.gov/Alaska, which allows you to go online and you can further refine your search by taking out Alaska and putting in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage. And again, that helps you refine your search to the area you're most interested in. And lastly, we do have an email listed at the bottom of the screen there that will help you get in touch with us if you have any questions or would like to talk about the weather. We'd love to hear from you. Hazardous Weather Map, we have several, much less watches and warnings out for today than we saw yesterday, but we have a blizzard warning out for St. Lawrence, that area out there, St. Lawrence Island, Chukchi Sea Coast, Bering Sea Coast until noon on Thursday. We have winds gusting to 45 miles per hour, and we have whiteout conditions and drifting snow that could hamper traveling out in that area. We also have wind advisory for eastern Alaska range with winds gusting 25 to 35 with also, sustained winds 25 to 35 with gusts to 60 until noon Thursday. And if we take another look here in the southern part of the mainland and the Panhandle, we have a winter weather advisory for Bristol Bay region until 5 a.m. Thursday, with winds gusting to 40 miles per hour, snow and blowing snow. We do expect 5 inches of snow in that area. And lastly, we also have high wind watches out for the northeast Gulf Coast and the Juneau area until Thursday afternoon. And the little red spot there, we do have one other thing. Winter storm warning out for 8 to 12 inches for the Klondike Highway above 1,000 feet. And that's out till 3 a.m. Friday. Taking a look at the satellite map today, you can see that pretty good cloud associated with low pressure system pulling out and moving up into the northeast part of the mainland. The next system will be coming on into the Aleutians. It'll be climbing the chain here, and you can see that climbing the chain there, and that's what's going to be bringing Bristol Bay its weather and that winter weather advisory for that area. You can also see how that system pulls out. It brought all the snow to the Anchorage Bowl yesterday, and it will be continuing climbing and enter into Canada here shortly. But we're going to be watching this next system here over the next couple days as it climbs into the Cook Inlet and finally into Susitna Valley and causing some snow again here in much of the south central area. Moving on to what's this look like on the weather map, you can see that there's that low 972 millibar low with an occluded front, triple point spreading rain and even some snow showers out across the Alaska Peninsula. We also did see some light snow showers across much of the lower Yukon and lower Kuskokwim and portions of the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, there's a stationary front associated with that exiting low. With weak snow showers across much of the North Slope and eastern interior. And finally down, there's still a little bit of lingering snow showers and rain showers across the southeast. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at, again, that low that's going to be climbing the chain and into the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay area with a 970 millibar low now. An occluded front out ahead of that system, with a triple point forecast and rain and mixed snow across much of the North Gulf Coast and even into southeast, with snow showers in the Anchorage Bowl, downslope early in the Anchorage Bowl, or otherwise snow showers across the Alaska Range and portions of the Kuskokwim Basin. Otherwise, light snow showers across the Aleutians and in the Bering Sea, and lingering snow showers across the North Slope. For Thursday weather, that low moves into the Cook Inlet region with a 975 millibar low now. And again, snow showers pinwheeling around that low in a counterclockwise fashion. Occluded front now through the North Gulf and into the southeast with mixed precipitation, rain and snow showers across that area. Lingering snow showers with weak onshore flow across the North Slope. But otherwise, continue to watch that system. Finally, that system moves into the Susitna Valley with mixed precipitation, rain and snow showers across the Panhandle. Snow showers expected across south central into Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, and up through the Susitna Valley and down through much of the southwest Bristol Bay region with lingering snow showers in that area. Otherwise, along that stationary front, weak snow showers, scattered snow showers across the eastern interior and down through the Yukon Basin. Out on the Aleutians, weak snow showers associated with that trough that moves into the central Aleutians. Low temperatures Thursday morning, we're going to be looking at minus teens across the North Slope. Otherwise, just near zero, Fort Yukon, -2, Bettles -1, even Arctic Village there at -6, Kotzebue -3, Nome -5, otherwise down through south central, looks like Anchorage is going to be 19, Talkeetna 24, Fairbanks 6, and down through the southwest, Bethel 6, the YK Delta looking like they're going to be in the single digits, but otherwise 20s and 30s across Kodiak Island and down through the Alaska Peninsula and through the Aleutian Chain. Taking a look at the Panhandle, looks like 30 is going to be prevalent through there, Cordova 30 as well, and Northway -2, Eagle 13. For high temperatures on Thursday afternoon, we're looking at again, minus teens across the North Slope with Point Hope -11, Kotzebue 1, Anaktuvik Pass 1, Fort Yukon 11, Eagle 22, Fairbanks 26, and down through the YK Delta, looks like we're going to be around 6 there at St. Mary's, Bethel 11, King Salmon 33, and 30s and even 20s, upper 20s to mid-30s across much of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. Kodiak 37, Kenai 31, Talkeetna 27, looks like Fairbanks is going to be 26. And let's take a peek at the Panhandle, looks like they're going to get into the 40s, Haines Skagway 41, Juneau 36. And looking at Friday morning, you can see that we're going to be still -20s across portions of the North Slope and down through the northwest coast, and Kotzebue -9 now for Friday morning, 3 at Fort Yukon, Arctic Village there -5, and Nome -8, Fairbanks 5 now, and Eagle 11, but otherwise looks like Anchorage is going to be 23, 20s through much of the south central, 30s in the Cordova and Valdez area, but otherwise single digits across much of the lower Yukon, Kuskokwim, looks like Bethel's going to be -6, 24 in Kodiak, otherwise 20s and even teens across portions of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. Checking in on southeast, we're going to be looking at temperatures in the 30s across the region. And lastly, for Friday afternoon, we're going to be looking at minus teens across the North Slope and single digits across much of the west coast. Nome -7, Unalakleet -1, St. Mary's -7, Bethel 2, otherwise Fairbanks 17, Eagle 19, Talkeetna 32, Kenai 31, otherwise Kodiak 28, 20s through the Alaska Peninsula, 30s across the Aleutians. Pribs look like they're going to be around 23. And looking at Cordova 41, 35 in Haines Skagway. Looks like we're going to be 35 at Juneau, Ketchikan 38, otherwise Yakutat 36, and even out there St. Lawrence -6, Savunga -6 there, and looks like we're going to be tying for, looks like we're going to be the high temperature for the day is going to be 41 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather for Thursday morning. We'll be tracking a low pressure system and frontal band associated with that system through Cook Inlet and into south central here, with IFR conditions across portions of the North Gulf down through the Alaska Peninsula, and even a stationary boundary along the North Slope will create IFR conditions up that way. Again, that low moves into, and frontal system moves into the North Gulf. That low pressure system moves into the Cook Inlet region. IFR conditions spread out from that low with frontal bands and frontal systems out from that low. IFR conditions across much of southwest, down through the Alaska Peninsula and down through the Panhandle along the North Gulf Coast. And again, that IFR conditions hangs in there across the North Slope. Still following that low into south central, we're going to be tracking IFR conditions through much of the lower Yukon and down through portions of the southwest and down through the North Gulf and into southeast Alaska, and isolated there in the upper Yukon with IFR conditions. Marginal conditions down through the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. And for Friday, looking at Friday afternoon, looking at IFR conditions again through much of the lower Yukon and portions of the upper Yukon, and then gradually getting better conditions there with ceilings and visibilities, with marginal conditions through the southeast, isolated IFR conditions down that way, and marginal conditions through the Akpan and Aleutians. For Thursday, Anaktuvik Pass, marginal and then slowly clearing to VFR conditions up on the Brooks Range. Adigan, I went for marginal conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill down on the Alaska Range, I went IFR conditions there. Rainy IFR, windy marginal, Isabel marginal, Mentasta VFR, but I also entered some marginal conditions there in the south entrance. Tanita marginal, Portage IFR conditions with marginal on the Cook Inlet side or the Turnagain Pass side. But otherwise, down in the southeast, IFR conditions for both Chilkoot and White. And for the freezing levels at the surface there across the Panhandle, otherwise elevated freezing levels through the Gulf region. Surface runs across the North Gulf and down through the Alaska Peninsula and out through the chain. Icing conditions, I went for above 4,000 feet across the Panhandle and into south central along the North Gulf. And then I also analyzed some possibilities of considerable moderate in portions of the southern Seward Peninsula, portions of the lower Yukon and lower Cusco, and down through the Alaska Peninsula above 5,000 feet. Otherwise, isolated moderate across the North Slope between 2,000 and 9,000 feet. For the jet stream on Thursday, 180 knot winds coming across into the Gulf of Alaska there, just south of the Aleutians. Otherwise, 125 knots coming into the Gulf and southwesterly flow aloft. Otherwise, that trickles down to 65 as you get into North America, but otherwise 25 across the northwest coast and a little low there just off the coast of California. For 9,000 foot winds, there's that big low there, counterclockwise flow around there, and winds generally from the southwest across much of the mainland and into the southeast with 75 knots there in the central Panhandle. Otherwise, across the Gulf, anywhere from 15 to 60 knots there, and down through the Bering, 15 to even 30 as you get closer to the central Aleutians. For 3,000 foot, again, low pressure system there, otherwise counterclockwise flow, bringing 10 to 45 knots across the Panhandle, otherwise 30 to 60 knots in the Gulf, and even 30 to 10 knots as you get into the central Aleutians. For turbulence, been looking at below 4,000 feet across much of the Panhandle and into South Central. South Central, I went below 5,000 feet is getting to the Alaska Range, but the Chugach Mountains and North Gulf below 4,000. Otherwise, along the Alaska Range and the St. Elias Mountains below 6,000 there, and below 3,000 feet across the Akpan and Aleutians. We'll be back with the marine forecast shortly.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is, of course, a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past, and we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions, but now they're also protecting the general public with aviation sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today, and you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Dehne at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.dehne.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at the marine forecast, starting with the ice edge. You can see that over the last couple of days with low pressure system in the Bristol Bay region, we had strong northerly winds across much of the Bering Strait, driving a lot of the pack ice south of Matthew Island. We expect that to remain somewhat stationary and maybe even move somewhat north over the next 5 days. There was a pretty significant opening here in Cook Inlet, down turning an arm, but otherwise continued ice conditions look favorable this year. For the marine forecast for southeast on Thursday, we're looking at gales out for the inside waters, southern and central inside waters, southeasterly 35 to 40 knots there. The Lynn Canal area looking at southerly winds 25 knots there with gusts of 40. Outside waters, storm force winds out there. Winds generally from the south 40 to 50 knots across much of the region, seas as high as 21 feet. Those back off on Friday. Inside waters generally from the south at 25 to 30. Outside waters generally from the southwest at 25 knots, seas as high as 19 feet. For south central on Thursday, looking at seas or winds as high as 50 knots from the southeast and easterly in Prince William Sound, up to 50 knots there, seas as high as 19 feet. Otherwise, rest of the Gulf region looking at winds from the south at 25 knots, seas as high as 15 feet. Down the Cook Inlet, winds generally from the north or northeast, 20 to 30 knots there. And for Friday, winds back off, winds across the North Gulf, generally from the south, 20 to 25 knots there. Otherwise, from the west, 30 knots across the rest of the Gulf region. Cook Inlet looks like we're going to be looking at winds generally from the west, 25 to 30, seas as high as 10 feet. Otherwise, the north side of the Cook Inlet region generally southwesterly at 15 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island on Thursday, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the west at 30 to 35 knots, seas as high as 21 feet. On the south side and the north side, looking at winds from the northeast at 35 knots, seas as high as 20 feet. Also in Bristol Bay, winds from the northwest at 35 knots. For Alaska Peninsula on Friday and Kodiak Island, winds switch to the generally westerly direction, around 30 to 35 knots there, seas as high as 18 feet just off of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, south side of the Alaska Peninsula from the west at 30 knots, seas as high as 15 feet. On the north side of the peninsula in Bristol Bay, looking at winds from the northwest at 30 knots, seas as high as 11 feet. And for the Aleutian chain, winds generally from the northwest at 25 to 30 knots there across much of the region, seas as high as 19 feet. And for Friday, the eastern Aleutians looking at winds generally from the east, 20 to 25 knots, even a 30 knot there. Otherwise, the western side and centrals will be looking at winds from the west or south at 15 to 25 knots. For the west coast, looking at winds generally from the north, even in Norton Sound, from 25 to 30 knots, Pribs from the northwest at 30 knots, seas as high as 10 feet. And for Friday, looking at winds from the northwest across much of the region for 20 to 30 knots there, seas as high as 7 feet as you get on the other side of the pack ice. For the Arctic coast, looking at winds just off the coast there, northerly 10 to 15 knots there, down the northwest coast and in the Bering Strait, northerly 10 to 30 knots. And for the Arctic coast on Friday, winds generally from the east at 10 to 15 knots, northwest coast from the north or northwest at 15 to 25 knots. For tonight's weather, we're watching this 970 millibar low moving from Bristol Bay into the Cook Inlet. Lots of precipitation out ahead of this with rain and mixed precipitation across the North Gulf and down through the Panhandle. Isolated and scattered snow showers through the Alaska Peninsula. And again, that low climbs into the Cook Inlet with 975 millibars now. Occluded front out ahead of it, mixed precipitation across much of the Northeast Gulf and down through the Panhandle. Scattered snow showers through much of the Southwest and into the Alaska Peninsula. See you again here tomorrow for Alaska weather. Thanks for joining.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.